Hey guys, tonight we begin with a ribbon of smoke rising through snow. Around a northeastern woodland village, wind moves through bare branches and pushes loose snow against the walls of a long, bark-covered house. From a distance, the building looks simple. Curved roof, dark entrance, smoke escaping through openings above. But step through that entrance, and the first thing you notice is not comfort. It is smoke. It hangs beneath the roof, drifts along the central aisle, and sometimes drops low enough to sting the eyes. Several fires glow in a line through the house. Raised platforms run along the sides. Families rest, work, talk quietly, prepare food, and store their belongings in spaces arranged around those hearths. Corn may hang above the living area. Dry wood may wait beneath a platform. The air nearest a fire feels warmer, while the edges of the building remind you that winter is still only a few layers of bark away. So this was not a giant, cosy cabin with perfect ventilation and evenly heated rooms. This was several households negotiating with fire, smoke, food, space, and weather, which is a much older version of arguing about the thermostat. And before we go farther, one boundary matters. Native peoples across North America built many different kinds of homes suited to different climates, materials, and ways of life. Tonight, we are focusing mainly on Longhouse traditions associated with Haudenosaunee communities and related Iroquoian-speaking peoples of the northeastern woodlands. If quiet history about smoky houses, shared fires, and the surprising amount of work hidden inside one warm corner makes good company tonight, like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me which ordinary object in your room would suddenly matter most if the heat went out on a freezing night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Near one of the hearths, an older household member slides a dry piece of wood into the fire. The flames brighten. A cooking vessel catches a little more light. Shadows move across the curved frame above. For a few moments, the space feels warmer, but that single piece of wood has already travelled through a much longer story. Someone had to know which wood would burn well. Someone had to cut or break it, carry it, protect it from rain and snow, and place it where it could remain dry. If the fuel became damp, it could produce more smoke and less useful heat. If the household used too much too early, the supply might run short before the weather improved. Warmth did not begin when the wood entered the flames. It began earlier, with labour performed outside the house. Food stored above the living space had not appeared there by accident. Corn had been planted, tended, harvested, dried, and protected. Beans and squash required their own cycles of work. Meat or fish, where available, had to be caught, prepared, and preserved. Mats and hides had to be made ready. Bark coverings had to be checked. Children had to learn where they could move safely near an open hearth. Older or sick household members needed care. The Longhouse worked because the household worked. We tend to think of shelter as a finished product. A house is built, and then it protects the people inside. But a winter longhouse was never truly finished. The fire changed by the hour. Smoke moved with the air. Bark loosened or needed repair. Food stores slowly declined. Fuel disappeared into the hearth one piece at a time. The structure offered protection only while people continued operating the system around it. Walk farther down the central aisle and the pattern begins to show itself. A hearth could serve family spaces facing one another from opposite sides. Behind those spaces, raised platforms created places to sit, work, rest, and sleep. Storage occupied darker areas above, below, or beside them. The result was not one enormous empty hall. It was a sequence of household zones connected by a shared interior path. That arrangement mattered in cold weather. Several related families living under one roof could share more than heat. They could share cooking, care, information, stored resources, and the attention required by open fires. A child was surrounded by more than two adults, An elder remained inside the activity of the household. A person returning from the cold entered a space where somebody might already be tending a flame or preparing food. The house gathered people close enough for labour and care to overlap. Closeness also brought smoke, noise, movement, and very little of what a modern real estate listing would call personal space. Privacy was available mainly in the sense that most of the people hearing your business were related to you. Still, the crowded structure held an important advantage. It concentrated the work of survival. Imagine several small households trying to maintain separate winter fires, separate food stores, separate repairs, and separate care for anyone who became ill. Now place those responsibilities inside one organised structure. The Longhouse did not remove the work, but it allowed the work to connect. That connection becomes clearer when the fire begins to settle. The brightest flames shrink. Heat still reaches the nearest platforms, but it weakens with distance. An experienced aunt notices. She must decide whether to add more fuel now or preserve it for later. A person close to an entrance feels a draft that someone nearer the centre does not. A roof opening that releases smoke may also allow cold air or blowing weather to intrude. Closing it too tightly may improve one problem while making another worse. Winter survival often lived inside compromises like these. More ventilation, less smoke, more cold. More fire, more warmth, faster fuel use. More people under one roof, more shared labour. Less privacy. More food eaten tonight, less food waiting for the end of winter. The building did not erase these choices. It gave the household a structure in which to manage them. And that is why its size can be misleading. From outside, a longhouse may look like a single shelter. Inside, it behaves more like a repeated network. Fire, family space, platform, storage, then another fire, and another set of family spaces farther along the aisle. As households changed, some longhouses could be extended. The architecture followed social life rather than forcing every family into the same fixed box. The people inside were also connected through kinship systems deeper than simple co-residence. In many Haudenosaunee settings, longhouse families were tied through the maternal line. A person did not merely occupy a sleeping place beside strangers who happened to share fuel. The house belonged to a network of relatives, responsibilities, and authority. We will return to that later, because the social structure inside the building was as important as the bark around it. For now, return to the first piece of wood. It is nearly burned down. Its light has passed across sleeping platforms, stored food, wooden posts, and the faces of people moving through the aisle. Outside, snow continues gathering against the house. Inside, the warmth remains imperfect, smoky, uneven, and precious. The fire is helping the longhouse resist winter. But before there could be fire, platforms, storage, or a roof opening carrying smoke into the dark, the household needed a frame strong enough to hold all of it. So the next part of the story begins not beside the flames, but out among the trees, where the shape of the winter house first had to be bent, tied, covered, and made to stand. The trees do not look like walls yet. They stand dark beyond the village, their trunks holding snow while wind moves through the thinner branches above. But somewhere among them are the posts, poles, and sheets of bark that will become the longhouse. Before the first winter fire can burn beneath a roof, people have to turn the forest into a structure strong enough to carry snow, resist wind, shelter stored food, and hold several related families through the coldest part of the year. The work begins at ground level. Imagine two long lines marked across the earth. Into those lines, sturdy wooden posts are set at regular intervals. These posts define the walls and carry much of the weight above. Between them, lighter poles and flexible saplings can be fastened into a framework. Some are bent upward and inward, meeting across the top to form the rounded roof that gives the longhouse its familiar shape. Nothing here is random. A pole that bends cleanly is useful. A pole that splits at the wrong moment becomes a lesson everyone hears. History rarely records the exact words used when that happens, but they were probably not ceremonial. The frame rises one piece at a time. Hands lift a pole. Another person steadies it. Bindings hold the curved members together. The shape grows longer and more enclosed as each new rib joins the last. What looked like a line on the ground becomes a tunnel of wood large enough for hearths, sleeping platforms, stored crops, tools, and many people moving through the same central passage. Longhouses varied greatly in size. Some were relatively modest, others were extended as households grew. It is safer to think of the longhouse as an expandable form, rather than one fixed blueprint. The structure could follow the needs of the people inside it. That alone tells us something important. A modern house is often planned as a finished object. Bedrooms are counted, walls are closed. A longhouse could express a different logic. If the household expanded, the building might expand with it. Architecture did not merely contain family life, it could physically record its continuation. But a frame alone does not stop winter. A sheet of bark is stiff in the cold as several people raise it against the ribs. One pair of hands presses the lower edge flat, while another overlaps the next sheet above it. A binding is tightened. Wind pushes once against the unfinished wall, and the bark flexes before settling into place. Elm bark is often associated with Haudenosaunee longhouse construction, although available materials and exact practices varied by place and time. The bark becomes wall and roof, secured against the framework so that wind and precipitation meet a continuous outer skin rather than an open cage of poles. Up close, the surface would not resemble a modern factory-made wall. Bark curves, dries, and shifts. Edges must overlap. Gaps matter. A loosened section can admit wind-driven snow or rain. A damaged panel is not an aesthetic problem. It is a cold draft waiting for the wrong night. Picture a hand pressing against one of those panels from inside. The bark moves slightly under the pressure. Beyond it, the wind is sharp enough to pull heat from exposed skin. Inside, the wall reduces that direct force. It does not create warmth, but it slows the winter down. One missing panel matters more than it first appears. Cold air entering near a sleeping place changes where people sit. It changes how quickly fuel burns. It changes whether mats or clothing remain dry. It may force a household to repair the covering while the weather is already unpleasant, which is history's preferred time for basic maintenance. The curved roof helps rain and snow move away, rather than settling on a flat ceiling. Yet no roof design removes the need for inspection. Wind can work at bindings. Moisture can weaken material. Fire and smoke can darken the interior surface. Seasonal shelter remains seasonal labour. Near one end of the structure, an entrance interrupts the bark wall. The opening had to allow people, fuel, tools, and food to pass through while limiting exposure to the weather. Every entrance is a compromise. Make movement easy and cold air follows. Block it too effectively and daily work becomes difficult. A younger relative carrying wood through snow does not benefit from a doorway that requires a small diplomatic meeting each time it is opened. As that person steps inside, feet carry moisture onto the floor. Cold air moves briefly down the central aisle. The nearest fire reacts. Smoke shifts. A child or sleeping adult may feel the draft before the entrance is covered again. The building is always responding to use. Open an entrance, and airflow changes. Add bark over a roof opening, and smoke changes. Extend the building, and hearth placement changes. Add more relatives, and sleeping, storage, and labour arrangements change. Along the interior walls, the framework supports raised platforms. These give families working and sleeping areas above the ground surface and create storage possibilities underneath or overhead. The platforms do not become warm bedrooms with closed doors. They become organised edges around the central aisle, places where bodies, bedding, tools, food and fuel remain within the same working environment. A person sitting on a platform can look across the aisle toward a shared hearth. Above, smoke gathers beneath the roof. Behind, bark separates the household from wind and snow. Below, Stored wood or other materials wait in the darker space. The interior begins to make sense vertically. Fire and movement occupy the center. Families occupy the sides. Storage fills the spaces above, below, and behind. Smoke rises. Cold presses inward. Labour moves between every layer. Even the roof openings belong to this arrangement. They are often described simply as smoke holes, as though smoke politely notices the opening and leaves. In reality, air movement is more complicated. An opening above a hearth provides an escape route, but wind, weather, roof shape, and the strength of the fire all affect what happens next. Cover the opening too much during snow or rain, and smoke may remain inside. Open it more widely, and the weather may become a new problem. The roof therefore completes the shelter, while deliberately remaining unfinished in several places. A sealed roof would keep out more weather, but trap smoke from the fires required for heat and cooking. An open roof would release smoke, but surrender too much protection. The longhouse survives by balancing opposites. It must be closed, but not completely. Large, but internally organised. Protective, but constantly repaired. Made from forest materials, but shaped by careful knowledge rather than simple availability. By the time the bark skin is secured and the first hearths are prepared, the building already contains the logic that will govern winter life. Every wall reduces exposure. Every opening creates a decision. Every post supports more than a roof. It supports platforms, storage, sleeping spaces, food, and daily movement. Outside, the wind continues through the trees from which the building came. Inside, that same wind finds fewer direct paths. But near the roof, above the place where the first fire begins to brighten, smoke is already searching for a way out. And the success of the winter house will depend on how well the people beneath it manage the uneasy partnership between flame, cold air, and the dark opening overhead. The opening above the fire seems obvious until the wind changes. A thin stream of smoke rises from the hearth, climbs toward the curved roof, and gathers beneath the bark before finding the gap overhead. For a moment, the system works almost exactly as a modern viewer hopes it will. Fire below, smoke above, cold outside. Then a gust moves across the roof. The smoke bends sideways. Some continues upward. Some rolls along the dark interior and settles lower before lifting again. A person nearest the fire turns away and blinks through watering eyes. An elder farther down the aisle notices the smell before seeing the change. The opening is still there. The smoke simply has opinions about how directly it intends to use it. This is the problem at the centre of longhouse heating. The household needs fire for warmth, cooking, light, and daily work. But every useful fire produces smoke. The roof must protect the interior from weather while remaining open enough to let that smoke escape. Close the opening too far during snow or rain, and the air becomes harder to tolerate. Leave it too exposed, and cold air or moisture may enter more freely. There is no perfect setting. There is only adjustment. Along the central aisle, hearths divide the length of the house into repeated zones of activity. Family spaces face the fire from opposite sides. People work from the raised platforms in the edge of the aisle. Children learn which paths are safe. Stored materials remain close enough to use, but far enough from the flames to avoid becoming a second, much less helpful fire. A hearth warms the people nearest to it most directly. Move several steps away, and the sensation changes. Near the flame, the face and hands may feel hot while the back remains cooler. Near an exterior wall or entrance, the cold becomes more noticeable. Above, smoke and warm air gather beneath the roof. Below, the floor and lower edges remain part of the winter environment. This was not a single indoor climate. It was a collection of small climates beneath one roof. The best place depended on what a person was doing. Cooking required closeness to the fire. Sleeping required warmth without rolling into sparks, which is an alarm system no one requested. A person wanting clearer air might move farther from the hearth and immediately discover why everyone had been sitting nearer the hearth. The fire also had to be fed with judgment. A large blaze gives stronger immediate heat, but consumes fuel quickly and may send more sparks and smoke upward. A smaller fire conserves wood, but offers less warmth. Damp fuel can burn poorly and smoke heavily. Dry fuel is not only convenient, it is stored winter comfort. Picture an older aunt reaching beneath a platform and pulling out a piece of wood that has remained protected inside. The bark is dry, the stick catches more readily than one carried fresh through wet snow. Flames move across it, and the hearth brightens without producing the thickest possible smoke. That moment depends on an earlier decision to store fuel where it could remain usable. A person gathering wood before the worst weather is working for a future night. Someone arranging fuel beneath a platform is creating warmth that may not be needed for days. Someone checking bark near a smoke opening is preventing a problem that has not yet arrived. Winter survival is full of actions whose reward appears later, usually when the person who performed them would rather be asleep. The hearth itself becomes a clock. Fresh wood brightens the interior. Flames settle, embers form, heat weakens. Another piece is added. This cycle continues through cooking, work, rest, and darkness. The building may appear still from outside, but the fire requires repeated attention. No wall can perform that task. No roof opening can decide when fuel is worth spending. The house creates a place for survival, while people continue supplying the judgment. Smoke reveals mistakes quickly. Add damp wood, and the air may thicken. Disturb the fire carelessly, and ash rises. Change the roof opening, and the draft shifts. Open the entrance, and the new current may pull smoke along the aisle instead of straight upward. A longhouse interior was shaped by airflow that could change with weather, fire strength, and ordinary movement. We should not imagine one permanent layer of clean air below and smoke above. Some smoke rose and collected high in the structure, but occupied spaces could also become smoky enough to irritate eyes and breathing. Smoke is easy to romanticize in a picture. It catches firelight, softens the roof beams, and makes the scene look ancient and calm. Actual lungs are less interested in atmosphere. A person living in that environment had to tolerate conditions a modern visitor might find difficult quickly. Eyes could sting. Bark, wood, mats, food containers, and clothing absorbed the evidence of years of fires. The darkened interior was not decoration. It was the physical record of heat being produced in a house without a modern chimney. Yet smoke should not be treated as proof that the design had failed. The building was solving several problems at once with local materials and established knowledge. It had to shelter multiple families, support storage, permit open fires, release smoke, resist weather, and remain repairable. Every solution affected another problem. A wide opening improved one condition and weakened another. A strong fire offered warmth while increasing smoke and fuel use. A roof hatch is adjusted. Fuel is selected. A cooking vessel is moved. A child is redirected away from sparks. One sleeper shifts closer to the fire. Another turns away from the smoke. A bundle of wood is checked for dampness. The entrance is covered again. None of these actions looks dramatic. Together, they keep the winter system balanced. There is also a social consequence hidden around each hearth. Two family spaces facing the same fire must coordinate its use. Cooking, heating, movement, and fuel cannot be treated as entirely private decisions when the flame serves people on both sides. The hearth creates warmth, but it also creates obligation. Who adds the next piece of wood? Who needs the warmer place? Who is cooking now? Who keeps a child away from the embers while somebody else works? Surviving evidence cannot answer every household decision. It can show us the repeated arrangement of hearths and family spaces. It can show that the architecture made sharing unavoidable. The conversations themselves have mostly disappeared. Still, the physical logic remains. One fire sits between related people. Its heat crosses the aisle. Its smoke reaches everyone. Its fuel comes from stored labour. Its danger must be watched collectively. By late evening, the flames are lower. Figures settle along raised platforms at the sides, closer or farther from the hearth, according to need and available space. Smoke continues to climb through the dim interior. Cold remains beyond the bark and nearer the entrances. Now the problem changes. A fire can be tended. A roof opening can be adjusted. But eventually, the household must sleep. And sleeping beside an open hearth inside a crowded winter longhouse means solving a different set of questions. Where the body rests, what lies beneath it, how warmth is shared, and how anyone finds comfort when the best place in the house is already occupied by half the family. The fire drops low enough for the platform nearest it to feel the change. A child turns in sleep and drifts toward the edge. An adult reaches out before the small body comes too close to the aisle, pulls the bedding back, and tucks it into a safer position. At almost the same moment, wind works at the entrance covering. Cold air slips along the floor. A sleeper nearest the doorway draws a hide or mat closer, while another hand reaches beneath the platform for dry wood. No one crosses the whole house. No one makes a speech. One stick enters the coals. A few sparks rise. The covering settles, and the family returns to sleep. That brief sequence contains most of the nighttime problem. Raised platforms lifted bodies, bedding, tools, and stored materials above the ground. Earth held cold and damp. A higher surface gave some separation from the floor, while space beneath could shelter fuel or belongings. Overhead, more storage filled the darker area beneath the roof. The sleeping place was not a private room. It was one working layer inside a wall. Mats, hides, or other bedding materials lay close to tools, food containers, and fuel. Across the central aisle, another family space faced the same fire. Feet could be placed toward warmth. A child might wake. An older relative might cough. A stick settling in the hearth could send sparks upward and bring a light sleeper fully awake. The longhouse supported rest, but it never allowed the household to forget that fire was open and winter was close. The best sleeping place depended on the body using it. A young adult able to rise quickly might tolerate a less convenient position. An infant depended entirely on the adults nearby. An elder, an injured person, or somebody who was ill might need easier access to warmth and help. The architecture created zones, but household judgment decided how those zones were used. Exact arrangements varied. Archaeology can reveal hearths and structural posts far more clearly than it can recover who slept beside which flame on a particular night. Still, the physical pressures are easy to see. A platform near a hearth offered direct heat along with smoke, light, movement, and sparks. A place farther back might provide quieter air but less warmth. Near the bark wall, cold pressed closer. Near the entrance, every late arrival brought a short weather report directly across the sleeping space. The warmest place in the house was also the place most likely to smoke into your face, because winter rarely offers an upgrade without terms and conditions. Night changed the meaning of every sound. During the day, the central aisle carried cooking, tools, children, repair work, and conversation. After dark, it grew quieter without becoming silent. Wood cracked, snow brushed the bark, wind pressed against the roof. A baby woke. A person shifted on a platform and disturbed a container or mat. The household learned which sounds belonged to ordinary life and which required attention. A low fire settling was familiar. A sharper change in the wind might mean a covering had loosened. A child's movement near the aisle brought an adult's hand into the darkness. A burst of sparks could make several people look toward the hearth at once. Familiarity changed the experience. A smell or sound that would keep a modern visitor awake could become part of the background of home when it had been known since childhood. Firelight, breathing, footsteps, smoke, and low voices could form a sensory pattern of safety, even when none of them matched modern ideas of quiet comfort. Comfort was partly physical. It was also learned. A sleeper raised in this house knew when the low orange light meant the hearth was safe enough to ignore, and when a sudden bright flare meant somebody should look. The body learned where the platform narrowed, where cold collected after the entrance opened, and how to turn away from smoke without shifting into another person's space. None of this made the night effortless. It made the difficulties familiar enough that rest could return after each small interruption. A visitor might see one crowded room. The people living there understood an internal geography. This platform belonged to a particular family group. That container had a known purpose. This pathway had to remain clear. A child knew which adults could help. An elder recognized the voices moving in darkness. Shared space did not mean absence of boundaries. It meant boundaries were carried through relationship, habit, and behavior, rather than sealed walls. Bedding itself led backward into labor. A mat had to be made. A hide had to be obtained and prepared. Clothing needed to remain as dry as possible. Wet material carried cold into the sleeping space. Platforms required maintenance. Stored fuel beneath them needed protection from moisture. Household objects had to be arranged so that people could rest without blocking movement or placing flammable material too near the hearth. Even sleep required preparation. A mother shakes snow from a child's clothing near the entrance. An aunt checks the bedding. A younger relative moves a container away from the platform edge. Dry wood is placed where it can be reached after the flames weaken, without sending a half-awake person stumbling the length of the aisle. Children absorb these decisions through repetition. Walk here. Keep this dry. Do not place that near the fire. Move closer now. Make room for the person who needs it more. These were practical instructions and social ones. They taught that warmth was shared, space carried obligations, and personal comfort existed within the needs of the household. Late in the night, a person wakes cold. Adding wood affects everybody nearby. Moving closer may require another sleeper to shift. Taking a stored hide means understanding whose use has priority. Basic bodily needs are negotiated through family relationships. The platforms therefore organise more than sleep. The hearths organise more than heat. They placed people inside a network where care, authority, labour, and responsibility became physical. A sleeping place was also a family position. A shared fire was also a social connection. The person who woke to tend it performed more than a practical task. By the darkest part of the night, the flames have settled again. Embers glow beneath ash. An older woman adds one narrow stick rather than a whole bundle. Along the platforms, several generations remain close enough to hear one another breathe. The weather is still being held beyond the bark, but the reason those particular people share that particular fire cannot be explained by temperature alone. The platform tells us where bodies rested. The people sharing it tell us how the household was organised. In many Haudenosaunee communities, those people were connected through the maternal line. Children belonged to the mother's clan. Women remained linked to the households of mothers, sisters, aunts, and other female relatives. In many documented settings, marriage brought a husband into the household connected to his wife's maternal family, placing him inside relationships that already had depth and authority before he arrived. That arrangement changes how we should picture the interior. A longhouse was not a line of private apartments occupied by separate couples. It was a living structure of mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts, children, elders, husbands, and other relatives whose responsibilities overlapped. The walls followed kinship. Hearths served family groups. Daily order rested on relationships deeper than whoever happened to sit nearest the flame. A child waking at night might hear a mother, an aunt, a grandmother, or another close relative without leaving the household space. Care did not depend on one isolated pair of adults. Knowledge, discipline, food preparation, and protection could circulate through a wider group. This did not guarantee perfect peace. Living with many relatives under one roof has never guaranteed agreement. It only guarantees that disagreement has excellent access to you. But the arrangement gave the household continuity. If one adult was away, ill, injured, or occupied, Other relatives remained nearby. Children could learn from several adults. Elders stayed within the centre of daily activity. Family memory occupied the same house as fuel and food. In many Haudenosaunee contexts, the clan mother held an important position within the clan and family system. That authority should not be reduced to a modern household manager or treated as a decorative title. It belonged to a broader structure connecting maternal descent, leadership, responsibility, and the continuity of the clan. Exact practices varied among nations, communities, and periods, but women were not background figures waiting beside the fire while history happened elsewhere. Their relationships, authority, labour, and knowledge helped organise the household itself. An older woman lifts a bark container from storage and judges its remaining weight. A younger relative watches. No written inventory is needed to understand that less food remains and more winter waits outside. The object passes from one set of hands to another, along with an unspoken lesson about restraint. Winter makes authority practical. Food, fuel, space, and care have to be organised. A child may need warmth. An elder may need assistance. A sick relative may be unable to perform ordinary work. Someone has to understand what remains in storage and what can safely be used. Those decisions rarely survive in the post holes left for archaeologists. They survive indirectly in the fact that the household continued. Look again at a shared hearth. Family spaces face one another across the fire. The flame is physically shared, but the people around it are connected through obligation. When one relative adds wood, another receives warmth. When food is prepared, smell and sound move across the aisle. When a child crosses the central space, several adults may notice. The fire makes relationships visible. Its light reaches people whose positions are not equal or interchangeable. Age matters. Health matters. Experience matters. Clan connection matters. A child carries different responsibilities from an adult. An elder may carry knowledge without carrying the heaviest bundle. A husband living among his wife's maternal relatives occupies a different place from a woman whose clan connection anchors her to the house. One small scene can reveal the rules more clearly than a list. A child reaches for an object stored near the hearth. An aunt redirects the hand and points toward another container. An older relative watches without interrupting. The child moves the object, learns where it belongs, and clears the path before somebody carrying food passes through. No wall marks the boundary. Everybody involved knows it exists. Shared space often requires more rules, not fewer. Who may use a stored object? Which path stays open? Where should a visitor sit? What food belongs to the wider household? Who responds when a child ignores the hearth? Much of this knowledge lived through practice rather than writing. People learned by watching, correction, participation, and memory. The maternal structure also gave the house continuity across generations. Daughters remained tied to their mother's clan and household. Children entered a network older than themselves. As families changed, the building could be lengthened, adding space to an existing line of hearths and compartments. The architecture became a physical record of family growth. A new compartment did more than increase floor space. It extended the line of shared fires, platforms, storage, and obligation. A daughter remaining within her maternal clan household could raise children among relatives who already knew the house's rules. New members entered a network with remembered places and established duties. The structure could lengthen, but the household still had to decide how food, fuel, sleeping areas, and care would expand with it. More room brought more capacity, along with more mouths, more work, and more reasons for cooperation to remain dependable through the coldest weeks of the year. Night after night, through deep cold. The practical value of that network emerged when something went wrong. If one adult became ill, the fire still required attention, food still needed preparation, snow still gathered, children still needed guidance. In a wider kin group, labour could sometimes be redistributed, illness remained dangerous, but responsibility did not depend on one pair of hands. The same held when adults left for hunting, diplomacy, trade, warfare, or other work. The household continued through those who remained, the food stored, and the obligations people understood. Communal living created resilience because knowledge was not held by only one person. A child could watch several relatives prepare food. A younger adult could learn repair from somebody older. A person making a mistake might be corrected before it became a winter problem. Skills were gathered beneath the roof just as surely as heat. But shared survival carried unequal costs. People performing the greatest domestic burden could lose sleep, privacy, bodily comfort, and time. A warm hearth looks natural once it is burning. A meal looks simple once it is served. A child looks safe once danger has passed. The labour disappears into the result. Near the end of the night, an older woman returns the container to its place. A child sleeps nearby. A relative turns one piece of wood in the hearth. Above them, dried corn hangs in the smoky darkness, waiting to become a meal days or weeks from now. Above those relatives, the harvest waits in the dark. The corn carries an entire season inside it. Before it became winter food, it had been seed-pressed into spring soil, young plants protected through uncertain weather, stalks tended through summer, ears harvested, kernels dried, and stores guarded against moisture, animals and human appetite. By the time it hangs in the upper space of the longhouse, the hardest part of the meal has already happened. The cooking comes later. A braid or bundle is lowered. Kernels are shelled. Depending on the dish, corn may be pounded, soaked, ground, or boiled. A tool strikes in a steady rhythm. Prepared grain enters a vessel near the hearth. Water and time soften what winter storage made durable. Beans and squash add their own work. Meat or fish, where available, may have been dried or otherwise preserved. Nuts, berries, roots, and other foods could contribute according to place and season. Winter meals begin months before winter. That is easy to forget when we look only at a pot. The final vessel does not show planting, weeding, harvesting, carrying, drying, protecting, and storing. One handful of corn can hide a summer of labour. Food occupied space because food was survival made physical. Ears could hang from rafters. Bark containers held shelled crops, dried squash, beans, tools, and provisions filled places above, below, and around the platforms. Some food could also be kept in prepared pits outside the house. The building did not divide kitchen, pantry, bedroom, workshop, and family room in the modern way. Food hung above sleeping places, fuel rested below them. Cooking happened in the central aisle. Children watched preparation while other work continued nearby. The house was crowded because survival was crowded. Everything important needed to remain close enough to reach, protect, count, dry, repair, or share. An older woman lifts a container and feels its weight. The level is lower than before. Less food remains. More winter remains. Somebody must judge the distance between those facts. A winter meal cannot be treated as an isolated personal choice when several related families depend on the same season of crops. Food must be prepared, distributed, and conserved within household expectations. The exact decisions varied, and surviving records do not preserve every conversation. But the pressure is clear. Eat too little, and people weaken. Eat too much too early, and later hunger becomes more likely. Save the better portion for someone ill, and another person receives less. Use more fuel to cook a difficult food, and the wood supply falls faster. Every meal connects two stores, food and firewood. The pot sits where those stores meet. Water is added. Dried ingredients soften slowly. Steam rises. The hearth heats the food and the people nearby. Cooking is part of the heating system, while heating is part of cooking. The same flame performs several jobs, which is efficient until different people need different things from it. One relative wants stronger heat beneath the pot. Another wants lower flames before bedding is arranged. A child wants to know when the meal will be ready. A question that has survived every century with remarkable confidence. The smell spreads along the aisle. For a tired household, it carries reassurance. Food is available. The fire is functioning. Ordinary routine continues. But reassurance should not be confused with abundance. A meal can be warm and carefully shared, while everybody understands that the supply is finite. Food remains visible in the living space. A braid of corn overhead is not abstract wealth. It is supper, seed, labour, and time suspended beneath the roof. Some of what is stored must last until other resources become available. Some may need to remain for future planting rather than immediate hunger. The household has to protect tomorrow from tonight. Seed grain made that tension especially clear. A kernel could answer present hunger or become part of a future crop, but it could not do both. Restraint, therefore, protected people who had not yet reached the next planting season. The most valuable food in the house was sometimes the food everybody agreed not to eat until planting weather returned again in the coming spring. The roof holds several seasons at once. Spring planting remains inside the seed. Summer work hangs above the platform. Winter hunger sits near the fire. Women held major agricultural and domestic responsibilities in many Haudenosaunee communities, although no single household schedule should be treated as universal. Children and other relatives also participated according to age, ability, circumstance, and community practice. Without preserved food, the Longhouse is only a roof over hunger. Without preparation, knowledge-stored crops remain potential rather than meals. Without decisions about distribution, one household can create danger inside its own walls. A child watching corn being prepared learns more than a recipe. The child sees what can be eaten now, what must be saved, how long preparation takes, how the fire should behave, and which adult has responsibility for the process. The lesson enters through hands, smell, waiting, and repetition. Near the hearth, the meal thickens. A hand stirs. Another reaches toward the darker storage space. The platform creaks as somebody shifts. Outside, snow continues to fall without any interest in whether the harvest was good. A bark container protects food from dampness and damage. A hanging braid keeps crops visible and dry. A storage pit carries autumn toward winter. Preservation does not make food immortal. Moisture, pests, spoilage, and accidents still threaten stores. A damaged container may represent work that cannot be repeated until another growing season. Food is watched, much as fire is watched. Both disappear through use. Both require planning. Both become dangerous when taken for granted. People do not enter winter with identical needs. A child, an elder, a person recovering from illness, and an adult performing demanding work may require different care. Distribution is shaped by household judgment, obligation, authority, and available resources. The surviving sources rarely show these decisions from the viewpoint of the person receiving the smaller bowl or doing the longer preparation. Archaeology may find burned kernels, storage pits, or tools. It does not preserve every moment when a relative quietly gave another person the warmer portion. By the end of the meal, the pot is lighter. The food store is smaller. The fire has consumed more wood. One system supported the other, and both have moved closer to empty. The container returns to its place. Above the platform, corn still hangs in smoke-darkened air. Beneath it, a hand reaches toward the fuel stored below. The pot grows lighter while the woodpile shrinks. The hand reaching beneath the platform does not find warmth. It finds the work that will become warmth. A dry stick is pulled from the darker space below, carried a few steps, and placed beside the hearth. The motion is small. Everything important about winter survival is hidden behind it. That piece of wood did not appear beneath the platform by accident. A younger relative had to leave the Longhouse, move through cold air, find usable fuel, cut or break it, gather it into a manageable load, carry it back, and store it where snow and damp would not ruin it. The fire consumes wood in minutes. The labour behind the wood may have taken hours. Outside, the forest offers fuel. but not as neat pieces waiting beside the entrance. Fallen branches may be wet. Green wood may burn poorly. Snow covers smaller material. Larger pieces require tools, strength, time, and judgment. The nearest wood is not always the best wood, and the best wood is useless if it cannot be carried home. A person steps beyond the packed village path with a load already planned in the mind. How much can be carried? How far can the household afford to search? Which pieces are dry enough to matter tonight? These are ordinary questions. They keep people alive precisely because they are answered before they become dramatic. Snow changes every load. Feet slip. Clothing gathers moisture. Hands lose warmth. A person carrying wood cannot move as freely as somebody walking empty-handed. Returning to the Longhouse means crossing the final distance while protecting the fuel from the weather that made it necessary. The entrance opens. Cold air moves into the aisle. Snow drops from shoulders. The bundle is lowered. For a moment, the fuel gatherer is visible. Soon the wood will disappear beneath the platform, then into the fire, then into smoke. The labour vanishes with it. This is one of the quiet tricks of domestic survival. Once the hearth is warm, the work that created warmth becomes difficult to see. The same is true of bark walls. When they block the wind successfully, nobody notices the draft that never arrived. When the roof holds against snow, a repair completed days earlier disappears into the ordinary fact of being dry. Only failure announces itself clearly. A panel loosens, and cold enters. A roof opening sticks, and smoke thickens. Stored wood becomes damp, and the fire struggles. A binding gives way under pressure, and what had seemed permanent suddenly needs hands, tools, and attention. An elder hears wind worrying at one bark seam before the sleepers nearest it feel the draft. A younger relative presses the panel from inside, while another prepares a binding. Cold fingers make the work slower. The repair is finished before the weather can enlarge the gap. Good maintenance has erased its own evidence again. Fuel storage shows the same practical judgment. Dry wood can be kept beneath platforms or in sheltered areas where it remains reachable, but fuel occupies valuable room. It must stay close enough to use, far enough from sparks, and organised well enough that people can move safely. The warm house contains the material that could burn it down. A spark lands where it should not. A child moves too close. A dry object slips toward the hearth. An aunt notices and shifts it back. That attention is the real safety system. No wall can watch a flame. No roof opening can guide a child. No platform can decide that fuel has been stacked too near the fire. Architecture creates possibilities. Human attention turns them into protection. Attention has a bodily cost. The person tending the hearth may sleep lightly. The fuel gatherer carries weight. The person repairing bark works with numb fingers. The person preparing food remains near heat and smoke. The person caring for children cannot give full attention to only one task. Comfort is distributed, but the labour producing comfort may not be. Some household members carried more of the repeated domestic burden. Their work could become so ordinary that it vanished from later descriptions. An outsider noticed smoke, size, or crowding, and wrote down what appeared unusual. The same observer might fail to understand who controlled stores, gathered fuel, repaired the covering, or stayed awake keeping the system useful. The record preserves the impressive building more easily than tired hands. A person sitting near the fire receives heat produced by fuel another person carried. A child sleeping safely receives vigilance somebody else provides. A meal uses food one group cultivated and wood another relative brought through snow. Dry bedding rests behind bark that had to be inspected. Shared survival was real. Shared did not mean every task was equal. That tension prevents communal life from becoming a picture of effortless harmony. Kinship can provide care while carrying obligation. Cooperation can protect people while demanding exhausting work from particular members of the household. The snow outside has no interest in whether the arrangement is fair. It only exposes whether the work has been done. By afternoon, another bundle arrives. Some pieces are placed where they can dry further, others are ready for immediate use. The younger relative who carried them holds cold hands near the fire and receives a little warmth from the system just maintained. Then the next task appears. A draft near the wall. A child to guide away from the aisle. A container to move. A roof opening to watch as the wind shifts. Winter work rarely ends. It changes form. One piece of wood helps heat the house, cook food, dry damp material, provide light, and make the central aisle usable. Fuel cannot be separated from the rest of Longhouse life. Wood activates several household systems at once. Remove fire, and the cold grows. Cooking becomes harder. Light weakens. Drying slows. The shared centre loses its function. Yet fire depends on the forest. Tools, physical effort, protected storage, and somebody awake enough to notice when the embers need help. The deeper pattern is visible now, even in the smallest ember. Bark depends on repair. Fire depends on fuel. Meals depend on harvest. Rest depends on maintenance. Children depend on adults. Elders depend on care. Household continuity depends on kinship. Every support has to be renewed. By evening, the newly gathered wood has been arranged beneath a platform. One piece is already burning. Another waits in shadow. Outside, the footprints of the person who carried it are slowly filling with snow. Inside, the flame brightens as though warmth were simple. But by now the forest is visible inside it. The building is only the part we can see. That is the meaning emerging from smoke, bark, corn, and the dry wood below the platforms. Posts hold the frame, and bark covers the shell. The household survives because several less visible systems keep moving inside it. Remove one, and the meaning changes. Begin with the fire. Let the hearth go cold while wind presses against the bark. The walls still stand. The roof still bends over the aisle. Platforms still line the sides. Yet the interior loses heat, light, cooking power, and one of its main centres of activity. Damp material dries slowly. Food becomes harder to prepare. Darkness arrives more completely. The structure remains. The winter shelter weakens. Bring the fire back, but remove stored fuel. For a few hours, flames continue. Then the last dry piece is used. A relative must enter the cold, perhaps farther than before because the easiest wood has already been gathered. If the returning bundle is wet, the fire smokes and struggles. If nobody can make the trip, the hearth becomes fading embers. Warmth was never stored only in the building. It was stored in wood, judgment, time, and human effort. Leave the fire burning and remove the food. The interior may feel warmer, but the household cannot live on heat. Platforms, hearths, and roof openings do not replace dried corn, beans, squash, meat, fish, nuts, or other prepared provisions. A person can sit beside a strong fire and still weaken if storage containers are empty. Shelter without food delays danger. It does not end it. Put the food back and remove the labour required to prepare it. Corn remains overhead. The container remains full. But no hands lower it, process it, watch the vessel, manage the flame, distribute the meal, or protect what has to remain. Stored food is only potential until knowledge and labour make it useful. History likes to show us the object. The object rarely explains who made it. Useful. Restore the meal, but remove repair. A gap opens in the bark after wind. Moisture enters near a platform. A binding loosens. None of these failures destroys the house immediately. That is what makes them dangerous. Small problems remain small long enough for people to become accustomed to them. Then the weather worsens. Cold moves through the gap. Stored material becomes damp. Smoke changes direction. A sleeper wakes because the wall has begun whispering winter into the bedding. The house needs maintenance before it looks broken. which is unfair because most things in life at least have the decency to become obviously terrible before asking for repair. Restore the bark and remove household coordination. Several fires remain. Food remains. Fuel remains. Platforms remain. But nobody agrees about when to use wood. Who watches children? Who prepares the meal? Who checks the roof opening? Or who makes room for a sick relative? One person adds too much fuel. Another leaves dry material near sparks. A child crosses the aisle without guidance. Food is taken without attention to what must last. A draft is noticed by everybody and repaired by nobody. The problem is no longer material shortage. It is disconnection. That is the midpoint of the story. The Longhouse was never merely a clever roof over several fires. It was architecture operated through kinship, labour, memory, and responsibility. The building formed the visible frame. The organised household formed the real survival technology. This does not mean every task was shared equally or every decision was peaceful. Some people carried heavier work. Some lost more sleep. Some performed care that later records barely noticed. Cooperation can protect a household while placing unequal pressure on the people expected to keep it running. No essential task remained isolated. Fuel affected cooking. Cooking affected food stores. Food affected health. Health affected labour. Labour affected repair. Repair affected warmth. Warmth affected sleep. Sleep affected judgment. Judgment returned to every other part. The building turned those relationships into space. A shared hearth made one family's fuel decision matter to another. A central aisle made movement visible. Platforms placed sleepers, workers, children, elders, tools, and stores within the same interior. The roof opening connected fire management to weather. Bark connected repair to bodily comfort. Storage connected autumn labour to winter survival. Walk slowly through it again. At one hearth, a mother stirs food. Across the aisle, an older aunt repairs a mat. A child carries a small object to an elder. Beneath a platform, dry wood waits. Above it, corn hangs in smoke-darkened air. Near the entrance, cold briefly enters with a returning relative. No single action explains the system. Their overlap does. The person preparing food benefits from the fuel gatherer. The person resting benefits from the bark repair. The child benefits from several adults noticing where the child is. The elder benefits from remaining near household activity. The people inside benefit from knowledge carried across generations. The roof, hearths, raised platforms, storage spaces, bark covering, family compartments and shared aisle express decisions refined through experience. They show what must remain dry, what must remain near, what can be shared, what needs watching, and what cannot be allowed to fail. A modern viewer may see smoke, crowding, and food hanging overhead. The household could read weather, fuel condition, kinship, obligation, and the distance still separating winter from the growing season. The system is strongest when it can absorb disruption. A relative becomes ill, and others take on necessary work. One adult leaves, and knowledge remains with others. A child is too young for heavy labour, but learns by watching. An elder may carry less weight while offering memory, instruction, and judgment. A household with several generations contains different kinds of strength. That does not make it invulnerable. Poor harvest, prolonged illness, damaged shelter, conflict, displacement, or loss of key workers constrain the entire network. Concentration creates resilience, and it can concentrate risk. When many people depend on shared stores and shared systems, serious failure travels farther than one body. Connection protects. Connection also carries weakness. By evening, the house has returned to its ordinary rhythm. Firelight moves over posts. Food is prepared. A covering is checked. A warmer position is given to somebody who needs it more. A child watches, remembers, and may one day perform the same work without needing the reason explained. The structure has not changed since morning. Our understanding of it is no longer only a bark-covered building resisting snow. It is a household turned into architecture. And once we see that, the next question becomes unavoidable. If survival depended on an organised network of labour and care, what happened when the people inside did not have equal strength, health, experience, or ability to endure the cold? The answer begins with the household members who depended most heavily on everyone else: children, elders, and people whose bodies could not simply move closer to the fire and solve the problem alone. A child does not need to understand the whole winter system to depend on it. The fire must remain warm. Food must appear. Bedding must stay dry. An adult must notice when something has gone wrong. Yet children were surrounded by the work producing those protections. They saw fuel carried in, food prepared, bedding arranged, and roof openings adjusted when smoke or weather changed. Learning happened close to the body. Before most of the house is awake, a child opens their eyes beside a low hearth. An elder on the same platform gestures toward one dry stick stored below. The child climbs down, carries it along the familiar edge of the aisle, and waits for another small gesture before placing it near the coals. The task is simple because the child has watched it many times. The elder then points upward. Smoke is beginning to curl differently beneath the roof. The child looks, but does not yet see the problem. A more experienced relative adjusts the opening, and the smoke lifts again. One person carries the wood, another carries the judgment. The lesson passes between them without becoming a lecture. A young child also learns that the central aisle is not an open playground. Hearths divide the space. Pots, tools, stored adults, and moving adults create paths that must be understood. A hand guides the child back from flame. A voice corrects where an object has been placed. Fire has always offered very direct feedback. As children grow, observation becomes participation. Carry this, put that there, keep this dry, watch where sparks fall. Bring the object to your aunt, stay near your grandmother. Exact duties varied by household, age, season, and ability. The larger pattern remains. Knowledge entered through repeated work. The warmer and colder places became familiar. Damp fuel had a recognizable smell. Wind working at bark made a particular sound. The house itself became a memory system. Every platform, hearth, container, and path carried instructions. At the other end of life, elders could contribute differently from younger adults. An older person might not carry the heaviest load through snow, but strength was only one winter resource. Experience could identify a problem early. Memory preserved where materials were found, how food was prepared, what changing wind could do to smoke, and which household decision had caused trouble before. The person who moves more slowly may still notice more quickly. Different generations carried different forms of usefulness. Younger adults could perform demanding physical work. Elders offered judgment, childcare, craft knowledge, family memory, and authority. Children began with small responsibilities and slowly absorbed household practice. The Longhouse placed these generations close enough for knowledge to travel. Later that morning, the same child who carried the stick brings a small container to the elder. The pace is slower than an adult's, and a little of the contents shifts near the rim, but the task is completed. The elder checks the placement, then points toward the clear path beside the hearth. Care is not moving in only one direction. The child receives guidance and begins returning useful labour, modest at first, to the people who provided it. Across many such moments, dependence gradually becomes participation, and participation becomes memory carried into the next winter, then taught once more beside the same kind of hearth, when another child was finally ready to learn the same task. An elder did not need to schedule a formal lesson on fuel. The lesson could begin when a younger person chose damp wood, filled the interior with smoke, and received a look powerful enough to survive several centuries without translation. Care moved in both directions. An elder who felt cold more sharply might need a place near the hearth. A person with limited movement might depend on others for food, fuel, or bedding. Somebody whose breathing had weakened could be affected differently by smoke. The household adjusted space around bodies that did not respond to winter in the same way. There was no universal arrangement. We cannot recover the exact sleeping place of every child, elder, or sick person from marks in the ground. But a wider kin network offered more possible responses than isolation. Illness placed the system under greater pressure. A sick relative might need more warmth, more attention, different food, or a quieter place. That person might also stop performing ordinary work. One illness created two demands at once: additional care and reduced labour. The fire still needed tending, food still needed preparation, wood still had to be carried, children still required attention, the bark still had to hold. If several people became ill, the household's flexibility narrowed. Crowded living made support immediate, while close contact could allow some illnesses to move through a household. Different diseases behaved differently, and surviving evidence is incomplete, but the tension matters. Connection protects. Connection can also carry risk. Care appears through small reallocations. A warmer place is given up. A softer portion of food is prepared. A task changes hands. A relative wakes more often to watch the fire and the person beside it. None of these actions changes the shape of the building, yet each changes how it functions. The burden could fall unevenly. People already responsible for food, children, fuel, maintenance, or household organisation might absorb more work when illness entered the house. Their fatigue became part of survival, even when no record described it. The protection was shared, the labour was connected, the cost was not always equal. Still, a wider household created possibilities that isolation could not. Children were protected by several adults. Elders remained part of daily life. A sick person could receive food and warmth while others maintained essential tasks. Knowledge did not live in one pair of hands. And children watching all of this learned what belonging meant. Belonging was not only a place on a platform or a named clan relationship. It was the expectation that one day they would notice the fire, carry the wood, prepare the food, make room, remember an instruction, and care for a person whose body could not meet winter alone. By morning, the child who carried the small stick watches the flames lift. It is a minor task, but the household has transferred one fragment of survival knowledge into another generation. Beyond the entrance, smoke rises from other roofs across the snow. Each column belongs to another household with its own fires, stores, relatives, difficulties, and routines. The Longhouse has carried us from one body to one family. Now the packed path outside leads toward the larger village that helped those households endure together. The path outside is narrow where many feet have packed the snow. It runs between longhouses, whose roofs rise in dark curves against the winter sky. Smoke leaves each structure differently. One column climbs almost straight, another bends low in the wind. Farther away, only a thin grey thread slips from a roof opening. A woman steps from one entrance carrying a covered container against her chest. Behind her, a younger relative balances several pieces of dry wood. A child follows with a small binding cord looped over one arm. They are crossing to a neighbouring longhouse where illness has reduced the number of people able to work, and wind has loosened bark near one sleeping platform. The distance is short until a heavy container must cross it in freezing air. At the second entrance, the covering lifts. Smoke and warmer air meet the visitors. The food moves inside first. The wood follows. The child carries the cord toward the part of the wall where an older relative is already pressing a bark edge back into place. Survival has moved between houses. From inside one longhouse, winter can appear to be a family problem. Along the path, it becomes a village problem. Each household has its own fires, food, sleeping places, labour, and internal authority. Yet no house exists completely alone. Paths connect relatives, neighbours, fields, water, storage places, work areas, the surrounding forest. Tools travel along them, so do food, fuel, news, warnings, and practical help. Community support was not an unlimited shared supply. Family responsibility, clan relationship, custom, leadership, need, and available resources shaped what could be given and what was expected. A village did not remove shortage, it created more ways to respond before shortage became complete failure. Inside the house receiving help, one person lowers the container while another adds the newly arrived wood to the protected storage beneath a platform. At the damaged wall, hands tighten the binding. Cold has already entered, but the gap has not yet become a larger problem. The architecture belongs to one household. The response belongs to a wider network. Several longhouses could stand within a settled village near fields and access to water, forest resources, routes, and other communities. Some villages were palisaded where defence required it, but the winter story does not depend on every settlement having the same outer wall. What matters tonight is the connection between roofs. The central aisle organises movement inside one longhouse. Packed paths perform a similar function outside. A person carrying food knows which entrance to approach. A relative bringing news does not wander through an empty landscape. Children learn the route between households much as they learn the safe path around the hearth. One path leads toward cultivated ground now covered by snow. The fields look empty, but their work has moved indoors. Corn hangs from rafters, beans rest in containers, dried squash waits above platforms. The winter village is still living on summer land, even when the land itself appears silent. A child looking over the snow may know which field produced well, where animals damaged crops, or which household had more difficulty storing its harvest. The field is not absent. It has become food, memory, and household judgment. Another path reaches toward the forest. Fuel gatherers use it until snow, distance, safety, or exhausted nearby wood changes the route. The forest supplies poles, bark, firewood, game, tools, and knowledge, but no resource enters the village without labour. A third path approaches water. In deep cold, the ordinary task becomes a careful journey. A container must be filled, carried without spilling, and brought through the entrance without leaving a wet, freezing patch where people walk. The distance may be short on a village plan and long in the hands of the person carrying it. Cold weather makes every journey more difficult. Carrying a container, even a modest distance, requires time, balance, and strength. Snow can hide an uneven surface. Ice changes familiar places. The village reduces some distances. It does not remove the work. Protection organises labour rather than abolishing it. Shared knowledge moves as employees as objects. A warning about worsening weather. Illness, a damaged roof, or changing conditions can pass between houses. Information produces no heat, but it can protect the things that do. A household warned before a storm has more time to secure bark, gather fuel, protect food, or move a vulnerable person away from a draft. A relative who knows how to repair a difficult covering may save another family hours of cold work. A woman who understands a preparation method can help make stored food usable when illness has taken experienced hands from a hearth. This capacity leaves a faint archaeological trace. Post moulds reveal where structures stood. Hearth stains reveal repeated fire locations. Storage pits preserve food remains. A palisade line, when present, marks a boundary. But the relative who carried a warning through snow, the child who brought the binding cord, and the person who shared food during illness may leave no clear mark at all. Again, the structure survives more easily than care. By afternoon, the repaired bark has settled against the frame. The visitors prepare to return home. The container they brought is lighter. The receiving household has more dry fuel and fewer urgent problems than it had that morning. No single gift guarantees survival. Help cannot replace a failed harvest across an entire region or make serious illness harmless. But a village gives one household access to knowledge, hands, and material beyond its own immediate strength. Resilience grows through overlapping relationships. The same overlap can carry pressure. Illness can move. Conflict can affect several households. A shortage in one part of the village may create demands elsewhere. Community is not protection from every danger. It is a larger field across which danger and assistance both travel. As evening approaches, people return along the paths. Door coverings lift and settle. Smoke, voices, and brief patches of warm air escape each time. Fires brighten inside. The village breathes through its doorways. Food is prepared. Fuel is counted. Children are settled. Repairs are checked. Messages continue moving even after outdoor work slows. Several households maintain separate hearths while belonging to a wider social world. From a distance, the village appears quiet. It is not inactive. A modern visitor arriving along the packed path might see bark walls, open fires, smoke, stored food, and crowded interiors, and decide within minutes that the houses were crude or disorganized. The visitor would see many correct details. The mistake would be believing those details had already explained themselves. The first misunderstanding begins at the entrance. Cold air moves down the aisle as the covering lifts. Smoke reaches the visitor's face. Eyes water. The interior looks darker than expected. Fires glow in a line. People sit and work along raised platforms. Food hangs overhead. Fuel waits below. The visitor steps away from the smoke and discovers a colder part of the house. That small movement is the whole problem in miniature. The opening above the hearth is not a modern chimney. Wind changes. Snow and rain affect how widely it can remain exposed. Fire strength changes. Doorways create currents. Smoke may rise cleanly for a time and then roll sideways beneath the roof. The household knows this because it lives with it. People adjust openings, select fuel, move around the hearth, and recognize changes in airflow. They manage a compromise between ventilation, warmth, cooking, and weather. The visitor sees failure because the room does not meet a modern standard. The household sees a condition that needs attention. Near one hearth, the air feels warmer. Near the bark wall, it cools. Near the entrance, a draft remains. The visitor may assume the house cannot be effective because the temperature is uneven. Even warmth is a modern expectation created by modern systems. A winter longhouse created useful zones. Work requiring heat happened near the hearth. Sleeping and storage occupied the sides. People moved according to task, age, need, and available space. A person bothered by smoke could shift away, but clearer air might cost direct warmth. Somebody cooking accepted stronger heat. A sleeper avoided sparks. Comfort was managed rather than mechanically equalized. The visitor reaches a platform and notices how many people share the interior. Crowding appears to mean disorder. Modern houses hide order behind walls. A bedroom door suggests privacy. A cupboard hides food. Pipes move water unseen. Heating arrives through vents. The longhouse exposes more of its operation. Fire is visible. Food is visible. Fuel is visible. Care is visible. Movement is visible. Because the systems are exposed, they can appear untidy to somebody unfamiliar with them. The people inside know the map. Family spaces face particular hearths. Tools have places. Paths stay clear. Children learn where not to step. Adults recognize responsibility. The absence of interior walls does not mean the absence of boundaries. Shared space usually requires more social knowledge, not less. A visitor can discover this by placing one object in the wrong location and receiving several expressions that explain the rule more efficiently than a written sign. Privacy creates another misunderstanding. Sleeping, eating, working, raising children, and managing family tension beneath one roof can be difficult for a modern guest to imagine. The quick conclusion is that the people inside did not value privacy. Ideas of privacy vary across cultures and historical settings. Family areas, appropriate behaviour, known boundaries, and social expectations can exist without sealed rooms. Privacy does not begin only when a door can be locked. Communal life placed people close together. Sounds travelled. Smoke travelled. Smells travelled. News probably performed exceptionally well. The correct conclusion is not that privacy was absent. Household boundaries were organised through relationship, behaviour, and familiar space, rather than modern architecture alone. The visitor looks upward. Corn hangs beneath the roof. Containers occupy storage areas. Dried food remains close to the people depending on it. What appears to be clutter is actually time. The corn is summer labour preserved for winter. The beans and squash are meals not yet prepared. Some food may need to remain for future planting. Storage near living areas lets people observe conditions, notice damage, and understand what remains. A modern pantry hides shortage until the door opens. The Longhouse keeps the remaining season overhead. A simple bowl near the hearth can create another false impression. It may look plain. It does not display planting, weeding, harvesting, carrying, drying, preserving, guarding, and preparation. It does not show decisions about what can be eaten, what must be saved, or who needs a particular portion. The apparent simplicity of the meal is the final stage of a complicated system. A hand reaches below the platform and brings out dry wood. The visitor sees fuel. The household sees another future hour of warmth. Stored wood has value because it is dry, close, and ready. It represents a journey through snow, physical labour, protection from moisture, and judgment about when to spend it. A visitor might suggest making the fire much larger. Maximum output feels like an obvious solution until the fuel is finite. A larger fire produces stronger, immediate heat, but it also consumes wood faster, creates more smoke, and increases spark danger. Winter does not reward the warmest possible hour if tomorrow's fuel was used to create it. The goal is continuity. Enough heat, enough food, enough dry material, enough strength left in the people doing the work. By now, the visitor has seen bark, fire, smoke, platforms, crops, and limited private space. Every detail was real. The misunderstanding came from asking the wrong questions. Why is the room not evenly heated? Why is the food not hidden? Why are so many people together? Why not burn more wood? Those questions assume that a house should deliver private, invisible, effortless comfort. This house had to keep a related household operating across a season of cold. Fuel had to be seen because it had to be managed. Food had to be protected because it had to last. Fire had to be watched because it was useful and dangerous. Children had to be guided because movement affected everybody. Relatives had to cooperate because no individual could perform every task alone. What looked primitive was actually specific. The building answered local materials, climate, family organisation, and accumulated knowledge. Its imperfections were real. Smoke could harm comfort and health. Crowding could create strain. Unequal labour could exhaust people carrying the greatest responsibilities. Respect does not require pretending those costs did not exist. It requires describing them without assuming that difference is ignorance. Late in the visit, the person steps outside. Cold air clears the eyes. The structure looks simple again from the path. Bark, curved roof, dark entrance, a thin column rising into winter air. But simplicity is harder to believe now. The visitor has seen food above sleep, wood beneath it, family beside it, and fire through the middle. The organisation simply does not hide itself behind walls. One question remains. How much of this picture comes from people who lived inside longhouses, and how much comes from archaeology, reconstruction, or outsiders who entered briefly, noticed smoke, and believed their first impression was the entire truth? When the visitor leaves, first impressions remain in writing. The household itself leaves a different record in the ground. The living interior disappears first. Fires go out. Bark falls away. Platforms collapse. Food is eaten, spoiled, scattered, or burned. Names pass through generations unevenly. Conversations vanish almost completely. What remains in the ground is quieter. A line of dark stains may mark where wooden posts once stood. The wood itself is gone, but the soil remembers that something interrupted it. Repeated patterns reveal the outline of a long structure. Inside that outline, reddened earth, charcoal, ash, or burned material may indicate hearths arranged along a central aisle. The house returns as a pattern before it returns as a story. An archaeologist can measure distance between post moulds. Repeated hearth placement can suggest how interior space was organised. Storage pits may preserve carbonised kernels, plant fragments, animal bone, or broken objects. Small remains show what people grew, prepared, stored, repaired, or discarded. But evidence has limits from the beginning. A hearth stain shows where fire burned. It cannot tell us who woke to tend it on one freezing night. A post line shows the curve and length of the house. It cannot identify which child disliked the smoke, which elder preferred a particular place, or who gave up the warmer platform when somebody became ill. The ground preserves structure more faithfully than kindness. Material evidence can correct stories that later writers simplified. A burned kernel may confirm a crop. A storage pit reveals planning. A tool shows skilled work. House arrangements challenge the idea that a village was random or temporary. Objects do not explain themselves, but they resist certain fantasies. If a popular image presents a longhouse as an empty hall without storage, family zones, or repeated hearths, the material layout asks where all the winter work has gone. Interpretation still requires caution. The same object may have served more than one purpose. A pit may have changed use. A house may have been repaired, lengthened, abandoned, or rebuilt. Fire can destroy evidence while preserving other material through charring. Later activity can disturb earlier layers. Archaeology does not provide a perfectly paused winter evening. It provides fragments and relationships. Indigenous knowledge supplies an essential layer. Haudenosaunee communities are not merely subjects preserved in the past. Cultural knowledge, language, oral histories, community scholarship, and continuing traditions shape how historical evidence should be understood. An outsider may recognize an object and miss its social meaning. A European visitor could see several families sharing one structure and describe crowding. A person raised within the kinship system saw maternal relationships, responsibility, and belonging. The visitor could notice corn overhead and call it an unusual storage habit. The household understood a season of labour, future meals, and obligations to people not yet hungry. The same detail can be observed accurately and interpreted badly. Early written accounts, therefore, require two separate questions. What did the observer actually see? What did the observer believe that site proved? Those are not the same question. A visitor might record bark walls, smoke openings, raised platforms, hearths, or stored fuel. Those observations can be compared with archaeology and indigenous knowledge. The same writer may use insulting language, assume European domestic habits are universal, or mistake difference for disorder. Evidence and prejudice may occupy the same sentence. Suppose an observer complains about smoke. The smoke may be real. Other evidence supports interior hearths and roof openings that could not remove every trace. But if the writer concludes that the people lacked intelligence or proper housing, that judgment belongs to the observer's cultural arrogance, not to the smoke. The household was solving problems the observer may not have understood. Communal living, food storage, winter heating, cooking, repair, family organisation, and the use of local materials. Criticism based on the absence of a European chimney tells us something about the visitor's expectations. Some accounts also copied earlier descriptions. Two texts may appear to offer independent confirmation, while one repeats the other. A later writer can add detail, sharpen judgment, or present borrowed information as personal knowledge. More pages do not always mean more witnesses. History occasionally discovers that its second source is the first source wearing a different hat. The strongest picture comes from convergence. Post patterns show structure. Hearths show repeated fire locations. Food remains show cultivation, preservation, and storage. Tools and fragments show material work. Indigenous knowledge explains relationships and meanings outsiders often missed. Written accounts add selected observations when their bias and dependence are handled openly. Together, these sources allow reconstruction without pretending to restore every missing detail. We can describe central aisles, hearths, platforms, bark coverings, and stored food where evidence supports them. We can explain maternal clan organisation in Haudenosaunee life without claiming that every household in every century followed an identical arrangement. What we cannot honestly do is invent the missing voices. It may be tempting to place a named woman beside a fire, give her exact thoughts, and let her explain the house. That would make the scene emotionally easy. It would also turn uncertainty into fiction presented as history. A more honest approach preserves human presence without inventing private facts. A hand repaired bark. A relative carried wood. People prepared corn. Children learned the safe path around the hearth. An elder passed judgment forward. We may not know their names, but the system could not have functioned without them. Their absence from written records is not evidence of their absence from history. Colonial officials often wrote about diplomacy, conflict, conversion, trade, land, or political authority. Domestic labour appeared when an observer found it unusual or useful to a larger argument. Repetitive work keeping a household alive could disappear because it seemed ordinary to those doing it and unimportant to those holding the pen. The archive follows power more easily than it follows smoke into a family compartment. By placing archaeology, indigenous knowledge, and written accounts beside one another, we see both the house and the gaps around it. Restraint does not weaken the story, it makes surviving details heavier. A row of post moulds is no longer a technical diagram. It is the footprint of a roof that once carried smoke above sleeping families. A burned kernel is not debris. It is one remainder of a harvest meant to cross winter. A hearth stain marks the centre of warmth, cooking, work, care, and obligation. The ground gives us traces of a functioning household. It also gives a warning about time. Many written descriptions helping reconstruct Longhouse life were recorded during or after European contact. By then, trade, disease, warfare, missionary activity, displacement, and colonial pressure were already changing communities. An observer could describe something long established and something newly altered without recognizing the difference. The house we constructed from post stains belongs to a world already beginning to change. The new pressures first appear as objects. A metal blade passes from one hand to another inside a household already organized around bark, wood, fire, food, and kinship. It may cut poles or prepare fuel more quickly than an older tool. The work changes. The family does not become less indigenous because a foreign object enters the house. People select, adapt, reject, exchange, and reinterpret materials according to their own needs. The relationships organising the Longhouse remain Haudenosaunee relationships. The growing season still matters. Bark still needs repair. Food still has to last. But the new blade carries a new uncertainty. If it breaks or disappears, replacement may depend on exchange routes controlled far beyond the nearby forest. Efficiency has entered the household with an invoice attached. Trade connects one winter task to distant decisions. A tool can reduce labour while creating dependence on a supply that may not arrive when needed. Cloth, containers, and other goods can become useful within older systems without replacing the knowledge those systems require. The deeper pressure arrives through bodies. A relative becomes feverish and remains on a platform near the fire. Then another person weakens. The longhouse that concentrates care also concentrates close contact. Family members share air, pathways, food work, sleeping areas, fires, and daily touch. Different diseases behave differently, and no single outbreak can stand for every community. Yet, epidemic illnesses after European contact caused catastrophic losses across indigenous nations of the northeast. Inside one house, the effect was not simply a lower number of occupants. A missing person could mean a missing caregiver, food preparer, farmer, hunter, craft worker, political voice, or keeper of family memory. Several losses could remove entire chains of responsibility. The bark remains. The hearth remains. A storage container remains where it was placed. But the person who knew when to repair, how to divide, where to gather, or whom to consult may be gone. One platform now holds fewer sleepers. There is more physical room and less household strength. Empty space can represent lost labour. Survivors absorb additional work. A sick person needs warmth and care while no longer performing ordinary tasks. Children may lose adults who guided them. Healthy relatives prepare food, carry fuel, maintain fire, watch the ill, and continue work that winter refuses to postpone. The same connection that once spread knowledge can carry illness. The same household that makes care immediate can find several people sick at once. Connection protects. Under epidemic pressure, connection also exposes. Conflict changes the fuel route. A path into the forest that had been familiar may become unsafe. Adults may be away for diplomacy, defence, or warfare. The household still needs wood, but fewer people can gather it, and the safest route may not reach the best fuel. A bundle brought home under those conditions carries another question. Was it gathered from the right place, or merely the nearest place a person could reach without taking greater risk? Repairs may be delayed, fields may receive less labour, food stores may be guarded or moved. Messages travel faster between houses. A village threatened by attack may strengthen defences or change ordinary routines. Security consumes work before danger arrives. No additional wall makes winter less cold. It addresses another pressure while drawing labour from the same bodies that must gather fuel, prepare food, and maintain shelter. Then displacement breaks the link between household and place. Imagine late autumn. A family leaves a village carrying tools, clothing, seed, preserved food, and whatever material can be moved. The longhouse itself cannot be folded and lifted onto a back. Posts remain in the ground, bark panels may be abandoned. Storage pits and familiar fields stay behind. The cold season is already approaching. At the new location, known fuel routes do not yet exist. A replacement structure must be built. Bark and poles must be found. Food stores are smaller because only part of them could be carried. The first hard weather arrives while the new covering still has weak places. Kinship travels. Architecture has to be rebuilt. The winter concentration system depends on place, nearby materials, cultivated land, stored provisions, known paths, and a social network with enough time to prepare. Movement interrupts every one of those advantages. A younger relative cuts poles with the traded metal blade. The tool speeds the work. It cannot restore the abandoned harvest. An elder recognizes which parts of the structure must be completed first. Children carry smaller materials. A container of preserved food is opened cautiously because there is no full storage space waiting overhead. The new house begins under pressure. Smoke may escape poorly until roof openings are finished. Bedding competes with tools and provisions for dry space. Every meal taken from the carried stores reduces a reserve that cannot yet be replaced. The family is rebuilding shelter while already using it, which leaves no clean boundary between construction and survival. Adaptation is evidence of knowledge, not proof that the earlier system failed. Communities adjusted structures, settlement patterns, materials, and routines as conditions changed. But adaptation has limits. No roof can protect a community fully from epidemic disease, repeated military violence, land loss, or forced movement. Bark slows wind. It cannot stop a political system trying to seize the ground beneath it. This is why dates and circumstances matter when we read old descriptions. A longhouse observed after years of disease, conflict, or relocation may already reflect disruption. A settlement active in trade may contain materials unavailable generations earlier. A rebuilt village differs from one that developed over a longer period. An outsider may record one scene and present it as timeless. It is not. A Haudenosaunee longhouse around 1600 does not represent every earlier or later household. A family under severe contact-era pressure does not represent ordinary conditions before those pressures intensified. There is continuity, but there is no stillness. Inside the changing house, familiar work continues. A newer tool shapes older materials. Corn is prepared. Wood is stored. Children learn the aisle. An elder corrects a mistake. The roof still needs an opening above the fire. The household absorbs change by placing it inside known relationships. Every adjustment leaves a trace. A metal object rests beside one made from local material. A structure stands in a new place. A platform holds fewer relatives. A task passes to somebody younger than expected. A story carries knowledge from a village no longer occupied. By this point, winter survival can no longer be imagined as a simple contest between one building and cold weather. The house is carrying climate, illness, trade, conflict, loss, material change, and political pressure together. Under new pressure, every familiar feature has to prove its value again. Near the end of a later winter, wind begins lifting one bark edge. The warning arrives as sound before cold. An elder pauses beside a hearth and looks toward the wall. Smoke has started moving differently beneath the roof. The fire is low because the dry wood stored beneath the platform has been carefully rationed. A meal still needs to be prepared. A child sits near the part of the house where the draft will arrive first. Nothing has failed completely. Several things are beginning to lean toward failure at once. The elder points. A younger relative leaves the hearth and presses a hand against the moving bark. Cold air slips through the seam. Another family member guides the child farther from the wall. A mother lowers a small amount of stored corn rather than a larger bundle. The person by the fire studies the remaining fuel and chooses one piece, not three. Winter rarely tests one system at a time. The bark covering needs repair, but the person fixing it leaves other work behind. The meal needs heat, but fuel must last. Opening the roof more widely may help the changing smoke, but wind is already working against the wall. A colder sleeping place must be reorganized without blocking the central aisle. The warmest place in the house is also becoming busier. A binding cord is found. The bark edge is pulled back against the frame. Fingers stiffen in the cold. Inside, an aunt watches the fire while keeping the vessel from boiling too quickly. The elder listens to the roof and directs one further adjustment. The child's sleeping material is moved toward a safer platform. That creates less space for somebody else, who shifts without turning the moment into a household debate. A small historical miracle in any crowded family. The scene lasts only a few minutes. Snow dust shaken from the repaired bark lands near the wall. The meal gives off a faint smell as it warms. A younger adult rubs cold fingers together before returning the cord to storage. The elder keeps listening until the wind produces only its ordinary low pressure against the roof. Around them, other relatives continue their work instead of gathering to admire the repair. A system is most successful when the emergency becomes small enough for daily life to continue around it. Quietly, repeatedly, and without ceremony, applause, or any promise that the next hard gust that night would be any easier to manage. It contains the whole survival system. Forest materials form the wall. Stored cord and practical knowledge make repair possible. Fuel becomes heat. Heat prepares food. Food supports the people performing labour. Kinship determines who notices, who moves, who assists, and who receives the warmer place. Age provides judgment. Younger strength carries out the repair. The central aisle keeps movement possible. Platforms hold bodies, bedding, stores, and dry wood within reach. No part operates independently. The wall does not save the meal. The fire does not repair the bark. Corn cannot decide how much of itself should be used. A child cannot manage the draft alone. The household links each material to the next action. The binding tightens. The bark settles. Smoke begins rising more steadily after the opening overhead is adjusted. One piece of dry wood brings the fire high enough to continue cooking. The food in the vessel will not be generous, but it will be warm. The child lies down in the new place. The house returns to balance. Not perfect balance, working balance. That distinction has followed us from the first smoky entrance. The structure never needed to produce modern comfort. It needed to preserve enough options for people to respond. Dry wood offered the option to restore a fading hearth. Stored crops offered the intent to eat when fields were covered. Several knowledgeable adults offered the option to redistribute work. A maintained bark shell offered the option to repair a weakness before a storm widened it. Kinship offered the option to care for a person who could not meet winter alone. Survival often means having one more option than the crisis can remove. The late winter scene also reveals the cost. Somebody leaves the warmer fire to repair bark. Somebody spends time watching smoke instead of resting. Somebody receives less space so that a child can move away from the draft. Somebody decides how much food and wood the household can afford tonight. The Longhouse concentrates help. It also concentrates obligation. As the wind eases, the interior resumes its ordinary rhythm. A tool returns to storage. The remaining corn is raised again. Damp fingers hover near the fire. The elder listens for the wall and hears nothing unusual. Successful care often disappears into what did not happen. The bark did not tear farther. The fire did not go out. The meal did not fail. The child did not remain in the draft. The household did not lose its balance. From outside, no dramatic event is visible. Smoke leaves the roof in a thin line. Snow presses against the wall. The house looks still. Inside, climate knowledge has just moved through hands, objects, roles, and decisions. That is what it meant to use a longhouse for winter survival. Families turned forest materials into shelter, harvest into stored time, wood into future warmth, and relationships into a system of care. The structure gave those actions shape. The people made the structure functional. Even the smoke now carries a different meaning. At the beginning, it was an unpleasant surprise. Then it became evidence of fire, imperfect ventilation, fuel judgment, and bodily cost. Now it signals that the connected systems beneath the roof are still operating. Smoke rises only because wood was found and kept dry. The fire burns because somebody notices it. Food cooks because something was planted, harvested, stored, lowered, and prepared. People remain beside the hearth because bark, platforms, and household rules have made that space usable. A thin column above the roof contains the story of everything below. The village grows quiet again. Paths fade under fresh snow. Door coverings settle. Inside one longhouse, the fire lowers while food hangs in darkness, and dry wood waits beneath the sleeping places. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the achievement. The house remains standing. The household remains connected. The system continues long enough for another night to pass. And when we return one final time to the smoke above the roof, it no longer looks like a simple sign of warmth. It looks like the visible breath of an entire family system still alive beneath the snow. By the deepest part of the night, the village has almost disappeared. Snow has softened the paths between longhouses. The edge of the forest is only a darker shape beneath the sky. From outside, there is little movement. Inside, the work has slowed but not ended. One hearth has dropped to red coals. Another holds a narrow flame. An older aunt lifts a dry piece of wood from beneath a platform and places it carefully where the heat can take hold. The fire brightens without roaring. No more is needed. The household is not trying to defeat winter in one spectacular gesture. It is carrying enough warmth into the next hour. Bark keeps most of the wind outside. Roof openings release enough smoke to make the fires usable. Platforms hold bodies, bedding, fuel, tools, and food in an organised interior. Kinship gives people a structure for sharing pressure. The small flame depends on dry wood. The wood depends on a journey into the forest before the worst weather. The fuel gatherer depends on food. Food depends on fields, storage, preparation, and restraint. The person preparing it depends on relatives, watching children, carrying water, repairing bark, or taking over when fatigue becomes too heavy. Even rest depends on labour somebody else is still performing. A child sleeping beside relatives does not see every connection. The child hears low voices and the quiet collapse of a burning stick. The house feels familiar because adults have made its dangers familiar enough to manage. Fire belongs in the aisle. Fuel belongs beneath the platform. Food hangs above. Certain paths remain clear. Certain places are warmer. Certain people recognize what to do when smoke changes. The child will learn these things slowly, not as a list, as a life. One winter night becomes another. One small task becomes a larger one. A hand once guided away from the hearth later adds wood to it. A child who watched an elder check the roof opening eventually notices the same change in airflow without being told. Knowledge moves across the aisle, across generations, across households, across seasons. Some of that knowledge is visible in the structure. Post lines show planning. Hearths show repeated organisation. Platforms show the use of space. Stored food shows preparation for scarcity. The most important knowledge leaves almost no permanent mark. How long to wait before adding fuel? How to tell when wood is too damp? How much food can be used tonight? Who needs the warmer place? When a child is ready for a new task. When an elder's advice should outweigh a younger person's strength. When a small repair cannot wait until morning. No archaeological trench can recover every judgment. The judgments remain present in the fact that the household continued. They also remain in the calmness of ordinary repetition. A container returned to the same place. A pathway cleared before sleep. A child corrected before sparks became danger. A smaller piece of fuel chosen because the night was long. None of these decisions deserved a monument, yet together they created the conditions in which people could wake, work, teach, eat, rest, care for one another, and begin again when pale winter morning reached the doorway again. Inside this winter house, survival is not hidden. It is stacked beneath the sleeping place, hung overhead, carried through the entrance, fed into the hearth, and shared across the aisle. That visibility can make the interior seem difficult to a modern visitor. It was difficult. Smoke could sting. Cold remained near walls and entrances. Fuel had to be gathered. Food stores could fail. Illness or injury could strain the household. There is no reason to soften those realities. Difficulty does not equal disorder. Discomfort does not equal ignorance. A structure can be demanding and still be intelligent. The house answered its environment through materials people could find, shape, repair, and understand locally. It answered winter through concentration rather than isolation. Several families, several hearths, stored provisions, care, memory, and labour occupied one connected space. Closeness became a resource. It made smoke harder to escape. It also made help harder to lose. A person waking cold was not necessarily alone. A child was surrounded by relatives. An elder remained near household activity. A sick person could receive care without being removed from family life. A worker returning through snow entered a space already holding fire, food, and familiar voices. The same closeness that created strain also created resilience. That is the final contradiction carried by the Longhouse. It worked because people accepted inconvenience from one another. They shared noise, heat, smoke, space, responsibility, and risk. The house did not offer every person an independent solution. It offered the household a collective one. Near the far end, the entrance covering shifts slightly. Cold air moves along the aisle and fades before reaching the central fire. A relative notices but does not rise. The covering settles again. Above, corn hangs quietly in darkness. Below, wood waits for morning. Platforms hold sleeping bodies whose warmth joins the low heat of the hearths. Smoke travels upward, meets the curved roof, and moves toward the opening. Some escape, some remains. The balance is imperfect, as it has always been. Yet the house is still functioning. Outside, fresh snow fills the footprints left by the person who gathered the last bundle of wood. By morning, the path may look untouched. The labour will seem to have vanished. Inside, its result remains as heat. The person who planted corn is not visible in the bowl. The person who repaired bark is not visible in the absence of a draught. The person who gave up a warmer place is not visible in another person's sleep. The elder whose warning prevented waste is not visible in the food that remains. Successful care disappears into what did not go wrong. Perhaps that is why the smoke above the roof matters. It is visible. A thin grey line rises into cold air, while most labour beneath it remains hidden. From a distance, the smoke says only that a fire is burning. From inside the story, it says much more. It says the wood stayed dry. The bark held. The food lasted. The hearth was watched. The child was guided. The elder was heard. The household kept enough of its knowledge, strength, and patience connected for one more winter night. Soon the fire will need attention again. A hand will reach beneath the platform. Another piece of stored summer will enter the flame. And above the silent village, the Longhouse will breathe once more into the snow